Okay, good morning. My name's Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. And today's class is on irrigation, fertilization, mulching, and crop rotation. Who hasn't been to our soil class before? Okay, so just a brief review. So if the soil's done right, then everything here is going to make sense. But if you don't do the soil right, then this is going to seem really weird. So real dirt is pretty much a piece of granite that gets ground up. So in the world, most of the soils are ground up granite. There are some that are a little different mineral, basalt, that doesn't have as much silicon in it, but most granite rocks are mostly silicon dioxide, which is quartz, which if you melt it, you get glass. So this soil here, which is off of a farm in Irvine, and the guy says this is the best farmland he's ever been on. This is mostly quartz. Now, farmland in California is noted to have about 1% organic material, which the University of California, Davis says is perfect. So we know that that good farmland does not have much organic matter, but neither does nature. Nature's organic content is 0.9% of volume, which is primarily dead roots. Dead roots in the ground make up the organic matter of most soils. Decomposed granite is a soil that's farmed on in the foothills like Vista, Fallbrook, that area, Temecula. So it's not quite as ground up as sandy loam, which the rivers do this. But coming off the sides of the hills and mountains, you have decomposed granite, which is still great soil. It's still, pieces of granite that's broken up. There are some other minerals in it. The reddish colors, probably iron. If it's grayish, it's probably got aluminum or magnesium in small quantities. So we created our potting soils over 30 years ago because we figured out, organic matter is terrible potting soil. So we have these two, our acid mix and our top pot, which are mostly quartz. So we base them on quartz, just like real dirt is. We had to make it lighter because this, real dirt is over 100 pounds per cubic foot. It's just hard to handle. Although, in nature, this is considered light soil. You get clay soil, that's heavy soil. So, and then our soils are a featherweight compared to real dirt, but they're mostly quartz, and that's why they work. Unfortunately, everything you go to a big box store or most nurseries, you look at their garden bed soil or their soil amendments, they're all rotting trees. So they take a tree and grind it up and let it rot and tell you this is great to put in your dirt, whereas it doesn't belong there. It really doesn't belong there. Soil itself is about 99% mineral, not something that just died. Okay, so irrigation wise, now I'll just mention, because we came across this hose about 5 years ago and go, okay, we've never had a better hose. So this is not the top rated hose according to a lot of websites. There's one called Viper, and I've used that one and I hate it. Well, I shouldn't say it's not terrible, but it kinks a lot more easily. This thing refuses to kink. The 5/8 inch, the 3/4 inch, we tried it. 3/4 inch pipe has twice the volume of a 5/8 inch pipe, but they use the same thickness walls and it just doesn't work. It'll collapse under its own weight, whereas this one's like the perfect size for this type of material. It almost acts like it's alive. You turn on the water and it's just moving all around the place, but it's very light. So it doesn't, when we drag it around the nursery, we don't knock over things. So it's the best we've seen. It's not perfect. When you use a hose, don't pull it by a wand or by the nozzle on the end of the hose. Pull the rubber, because the place where the rubber joins to the metal parts is always the weak part. Like what's happened to me last year. I had a new one of these out at our growing ground. It was 100. It was one of those real hot days, over 100 degrees out there, and this was laying on the rock next to a block wall, and the fitting on the end just pulled off. When I turned the pressure on, it just pulled off, just because plastic gets so soft when it's hot. And I just put it back on, put another connector onto it to hold it in place, and I haven't had any problems since. But that's one of the problems with hoses, is where the front and back end are the weak parts of the hose. The middle part can last a long time, but if you kink it right around the metal parts, that's where the trouble starts. But this has been the best hose. It's really expensive. I mean, we sell this thing for $169. You can probably find it at a big box store cheaper than that, but it is, I don't think we'll ever use a different hose again, because that one works so well for us. So irrigation wise, one of the things we'll always tell you is there's no such thing as overwatering. So according to academia, the number one things that homeowners do to kill their plants is overwater. That term was invented in the 1980s because that's when they started growing plants in compost. And compost by itself is trying to rot the roots, because that's what it's supposed to be. Compost is supposed to be rotting organic matter, and you put it next to the roots and it tries to rot the roots. Plus, you put it in the ground next to the roots, it takes away the oxygen, and low oxygen levels promote root rot. So all this compost around the roots is causing root rot. The water has little to do with it. I mean, if it was bone dry, the plant wouldn't be alive and wouldn't be rotting either. But it's not the water that caused the initial rotting, because plants can live in water. I mean, everyone's grown, everyone knows avocados. Well, most people know that avocados are one of the most, if not the most rot-prone fruit tree. But everyone's grown an avocado pit in a glass of water. So they'll grow hydroponically in water. The key is that tap water. So the water districts know that tap water has to have enough oxygen in it so that when you water your plants, you don't kill them. And when you put it in a fish bowl, you don't kill the fish. So tap water is 5 to 7 parts per million oxygen. And some days here in Santa Ana, you'll notice your water looks real milky. Well, if you look at it carefully in a glass of water, those are actually little bubbles, because they just aerated it. They had aerated to get more oxygen into the water. So by law, tap water has got to be 5 to 7 parts per million, which is a great range for plants. So you put a plant in pure water, 5 to 7 parts per million, it can live in there a long time. I mean, it can live in there indefinitely. So that's the thing. If you drop below 2 parts per million, that's when you start losing a lot of plants. There's not enough. The same with fish. Fish can't live in water that's the parts per million. The oxygen content is too low. Now, just so you know, hot water can't hold as much oxygen. So cold water generally has more oxygen. If you heat up water, and if you have a watering can, you set it out in the sun, heats it up, the oxygen content of that water has dropped a lot lower, and you water some sensitive plants, you might kill them by drowning, because there's not enough air there. But generally our tap water is not the problem. It's the compost around the roots in the root zone that's causing the low oxygen levels. So what was interesting is a couple years ago, when we had a good snowfall in the Sierras, and they knew that they were going to overflow the reservoirs, and besides that, the groundwater in the Central Valley was really low, because they had been pulling it out for, we had essentially 12 years of drought before that. They told the farmers, okay, turn on your sprinklers, don't turn them off. Just let them go. Flood your fields. We need to get that groundwater, refilled. And so they did that. So we saw, even last couple of years ago when I was up driving through the Central Valley, there were still fields that were flooded. It doesn't hurt the plants. If the water going into the ground's got this much oxygen in it, no problem. Now, if the water sat there for months and it didn't move, then the roots do use oxygen in the water. The roots actually breathe too. And then it would get lower and lower and lower if the water wasn't moving at all. So in that case, you need some drainage to get some airflow back into the soil. But the water can sit a long time before the plants use up the oxygen. Compost uses up oxygen way faster than the plant's roots do. So it's not a matter of overwatering is not the issue. It's adequate water. You need to know exactly how much water that your plants will perform well on, but it won't kill them if you overdo it. Again, unless, the plants that you get from most nurseries have compost on them. That's the problem. So if you deal with that, we talked about that a couple weeks ago, where you take all that soil off and either put it in the native soil or put it in our soil so it can sit in the water without any problems. So once you do that, yeah, you can water your yard as much as you like, and you won't hurt anything. Because that was in the 1960s. My dad was a landscaper, and when they set up people's yards, they just turned on the sprinklers to go on automatically 3 times a day, 5 minutes each for the first couple of weeks. Then they would set it to every other day. But they wanted, and farms do that too. When farms first plant, we leased land on a farm about 10 years ago, and when they first plant a crop, they'll have all these sprinklers going for hours. It's real light sprinkling for hours to get that ground wet the first time. And then they'll go switch to drip after that. But they use sprinklers to get that ground real wet. You got to make sure the plants are damp. So in general, what we also mentioned is that the average plant, the roots are only about 12 inches deep. We were taught differently 60 years ago. When I was in school, 55 years ago, they told us that the root system's a mirror image at the top. No, it's not. The roots have to breathe air, so they're within a foot of the surface for the most part. If you have real gravelly soil, they'll go down deep. They said in some of the rock-filled canyons, roots will go down 25 foot because air can get in there. In fact, one of my friends who's a geologist says they were examining an earthquake fault once 200 foot down, and there were roots down in there in that earthquake fault because the air can get all the way down. So what farmers used to do before they had computers is they'd walk around with this piece of rebar. Now, rebar and soil, well, it's similar. If you work with modeling clay in elementary school, you'll know that if the clay is wet, you can push anything through it. Once it gets dry, you can't push anything through it. There's just no way. And any soil works the same way. If the soil is dry, you just can't push things through it. If it's wet, the water is like a lubricant. It pushes the particles aside. You can push sticks in. So farmers would always want to make sure that they can push this rebar. It doesn't have to be this size. It can be skinnier. It can be slightly wider. If they can push this in the ground between 1 and 1.5 feet deep, their irrigation was right on target. So they'll keep the soil moist. I mean, nowadays they're telling us you got to let the soil dry out between waterings. In farming, no, you don't want the soil to dry out. You want the soil to always be wet. Once the soil dries out, the plant, if it's a fruit tree, it starts aborting its crop. It's going, okay, we don't have enough water to finish this thing. But, for most plants growing in compost, if you don't let that soil become unsaturated, so that term, so soil, if you look at soil in a magnifying glass, most of the sand particles are basically round, and then silt is basically round but a lot smaller, and clay is like flakes. If all the gaps between these particles are filled with water, that's saturated soil. air can't go through saturated soil. And if you have compost mixed within that, there's no oxygen left in that mix until the air pockets become unfilled with water. So it's no longer saturated. That's the difference between saturated soil and moist soil. Moist soil still has a lot of moisture attached to these particles, but saturated soil, there's no air spaces between them. All the air spaces between the soil particles have been filled with water. So anyway, we want the soil in this top foot of soil to always be moist. So the way farmers would check that, if they can, any day they go out to the field, if they can push this down a foot to foot and a half, somewhere in that range, 1 to 1.5 feet, their irrigation that they're doing was on target. Now, in the old days, because they had such limited technology, they flooded the field once a week because it was a big deal to open the floodgates and flood the field. And then so there, the field was really wet, and then it was really dry, and they'd open the floodgates again, really wet, really dry. Once they got drip irrigation going with the little tubes all over the orchards, they're watering every couple days, every 2 days, or even every day. Well, the latest research coming from both University of Florida and some research groups in Brazil are showing that, instead of watering 2 hours on drip every 2 days, if you water 20 minutes 3 times every day, the plants did better. They looked better, they did better. It's just like us. I mean, we'd like at least 3 drinks a day. If you have 1 drink a day, you feel bloated for part of the day, and then you feel too dry the rest of the day. Plants like the soil moisture to be as constant as they can, completely moist the top foot. You don't want it to go dry. You want to keep it moist for best production. There is a farm in the Central Valley that says they water 18 times a day. It's all computer checked. So the computer says, okay, this plant used this much water in the last hour, replenish it. And they said they saved 30% on their water bill just by small increments all the time. Now, the University of California, Davis did initially think that constant irrigation would cause shallow roots versus once a week watering causing roots to search for the water. So they did that in an orchard. Half the orchard was watered daily lightly, and the other half of the orchard was watered weekly, deeply, with the same amount of water of the same irrigation system. And then at the end of the year, they pulled the trees out of the ground, and they said, this side that was watered daily has significantly bigger roots. So all that stuff that they tell us about plants searching for water if they get dry is incorrect. They go where the water is constantly. So you have to take a lot of what we're being told with a grain of salt, because they keep telling us, they still tell us this. If you water your plants deeply and frequently, they'll get deeper roots and search for the water. Well, that hasn't proven to be the case in research. When they actually did the research, they got the opposite result. So now what we're talking about here is production plants. If you're growing something, you don't want flowers, you want vegetables, you want fruits, you want this. If you just have a hedge or a foundation shrub, you don't need to do anything but look green. Let it get dry. You don't have to follow these rules. But if you need a plant to produce a crop, bloom, do something productive, it's more productive if you keep it evenly moist at all times. Now in irrigation, they have a coefficient, they call it, of compared to grass. So grass lawns are considered the most water hog type plant. So they're considered, I think, coefficient of 1. And most other plants need fractions of what grass needs to live on. So most of the fruit trees, they say coefficient of 0.6. So most fruit trees can get by with 60% of what grass can. And most other shrubs too can get by on about 60% of what grass can. So most of the things we grow in a garden are better for the water bill than grass. Grass is the heavy user. And just so you know, so the lowest water use is January and the highest water use is generally July. And on grass lawns, if you're using sprinklers, because grass is still more efficient using sprinklers, it's 4 minutes per week in January and 44 minutes per week in July. So you can see in July, plants are using about 11 times more water than they are in January. Now, plants don't really use this much water. They're losing it when they open their pores in their leaves to let in the carbon dioxide. They're losing the water at the same time. And just so you know, plants are using less water now than they did 50 years ago because there's a lot more carbon dioxide in the air. So they said plants open their pores to let in the carbon dioxide, and then they close them when they have enough carbon dioxide. Well, the carbon dioxide content of the air right now may be almost double what it was 50 years ago. So they're saying, so NASA is saying that when they take pictures of the Earth, it's greener now than it was 50 years ago because the deserts are greening up. The desert plants don't have to lose as much water to get the carbon dioxide they need to grow. So carbon dioxide is the #1 nutrient that plants use. And so carbon dioxide is the biggest nutrient source plants have. That's aside. Okay, so water-wise, and the other problem we have with the soil in Orange County, if not everywhere, is that groundwater only absorbs about 4 minutes of irrigation per hour. That's why they have this number 4 here. So if you turn on your sprinklers, in about 4 minutes, you start getting runoff. So they don't want you to do it more than 4 minutes at a shot. But you can see here, we got to do 11 times in a week, which is pretty much twice a day in the summer. You know, if it's 100 degrees, you definitely do have to do it twice a day in the summer. If it's 110, you might have to do it 3 times a day. Water usage really goes up above 80 degrees and it drops to almost 0 below 55. So if we have a week, like we had some weeks in December, it seemed that the daytime highs were not getting much above 55. And you can say, oh, you don't have to water that week at all. The plants just aren't using any. So 4 minutes at a time. What I was doing with the lawn is, watering 4 minutes at, or 5 if your computer does that. 5 minutes at 6 in the morning, wait an hour. 5 minutes at 7 in the morning, wait an hour. 5 minutes at 8 in the morning, something like that. The only disadvantage of watering in the afternoon is the winds is more likely to blow in the afternoon and blow the water off target if you have sprinklers. So that's the main reason we like to water in the morning. One thing to know about water is that you don't want to keep leaves wet for 12 hours straight. You get a lot of diseases that way. And even grass can get diseased if the leaves are wet for 12 hours, which means you don't want to water in the evening if you're getting the leaves wet, if it's humid. If it's 90 degrees that day, no problem. It's going to be dry in a few minutes. But if it's a real humid day and you water in the evening and the leaves stay wet till noon the next day, you're more likely to get diseases on the leaves. The leaves diseases need a droplet of water to just sit there for minimum 5 hours, 6 hours before the disease spore, germinates in the droplet of water, and it takes time to penetrate the leaf surface. And if the water dries out within a few hours, it kills the disease. But if the water sits there for too long, especially overnight, then you can pick up diseases even on grass. You can get that rust fungus starting on grass. So that's the key, is water in the morning, or anytime you expect the water to dry up fairly quickly is fine. And the Portland Rose Garden said that they would turn on the sprinklers every morning because it would wash any dew on the leaves off it. So dew deposits in the morning, and if the dew's on there too long, they get diseases. So they would turn on the sprinklers to interrupt the fact that that dew was on there for a couple hours already, and it would just wash it off. And then the disease spores would have to start over again, but they didn't have time because by 8 or 9 in the morning, it was gone. So that they said that really helped the rose, helped not to have to treat the roses for diseases. Just wash them off every morning, as long as they would draw off within a few hours. So diseases can't start during a rainstorm, they start after. When it's real humid, the water just sitting there. So that's what to know about it. But anyway, try to maintain your moisture about a foot to 1.5 feet deep. And the only way you can tell is one of these. Yes.
Like on tomato plants, in the morning, you can see there's moisture on the leaves. Is that good or bad?
Well, if it sits there, it's just the length of time it sits there.
Okay.
So if it sits there too long, they can get disease spores. I mean, there's so many diseases tomatoes can get: early blight, late blight, anthracnose, bacterial spots, and it's all in droplets of water.
But that's not dew, right? That's coming up. What is that when they're...
Well, actually, a lot of plants exude moisture out of their, out of their stomach. I don't know where it comes from, but a lot of plants have droplets of water sitting on the edge of the leaf in the morning.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's a problem if it's coming right out of the plant. But yeah, a lot of plants do that. I'm not a big fan of drip systems, only because they don't last as long as sprinklers, and they're very vulnerable to animal damage, especially when you have a drip irrigation on a lawn. It's like, okay, if one of those lines breaks underground, how do you fix it? Just can't do it. So I'm not a big fan of drip. I like sprinklers better. Generally, sprinklers don't waste water on mature gardens because plants will send out roots everywhere. When you first plant a yard, then yeah, a drip system's more efficient, but it becomes a pain even after 6 months. Pieces just start breaking on you. They're just not meant, in farming, no problem. The farmer walks his field at least once a month checking for broken irrigation stuff, but homeowners, I was always afraid to go on vacation, and inevitably something would stop working on vacation. So sprinklers just built a little stronger. Okay, let me think. Any questions on irrigation? So too much water, not a problem. I mean, that one year, I think it was 98, where we had like over 30 inches of rain that year. I took my rebar out to my lawn, which is pure clay. I pushed it all the way to my handle. It was just crazy. I'm going, God, I've never seen that before, where you can push it all the way down into the ground. That was wild. But do know one of the things we've noticed is on grass lawns, they love to be 12 to 18 inches wet. When you get down to about 10 inches on a fescue lawn, which is the most popular grass, then you start getting those little tips that look dry, little brown tips on your lawn. When you get down to 4 inches of moisture, when you push this in 4 inches, your lawn starts to brown out and disappear. It actually just disappears. and then you can restore it. So the thing to know about grasses all come from areas of the world where there's dry seasons. That's why they're grass. They can go to sleep, turn brown, disappear, and then when you re-wet the soil to a depth of 12 inches, they just wake up and get going. Because we've seen that on our own lawn. So where they got too dry, it just went to sleep, it turned to a bare spot, and then you watered 3 times a day for a week, and suddenly this all grows back. So next time we have a summer drought, just turn off your water. You know, they tell you turn back your water. Just turn off your water for the summer and then turn back on in the fall. Yes.
I know there's a lot of people now who are getting away from lawns because of water use. I'm sorry. There's a lot of people now getting away from having lawns because of the water use.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's no purpose in a lawn in a dry climate like ours. So, you know, you just grow other shrubs. There are a few lawn substitutes that look like grass that use less water, but there's not many. Most of the grasses all use a lot of water. Yeah, a lot of people are using this new ice plant called Ruchia, which it's a green ice plant, and it's real small leaves, and you can actually walk on it without crushing it. So that one is interesting. We have some samples out on the side. So, you know, if you don't water ice plant, it doesn't usually die for a long time. It grows better if you water it. But yeah, a green ice plant that you can walk on is pretty interesting. So, okay, so irrigation, more frequent light irrigations is a key to good production, apparently. And you know, of course, if you're hand watering, I'm leasing a house right now, and I'm hand watering it because I don't want to set up drip systems in my vegetable area. So we have to go out there and hand water just about every day when it's above 80 degrees. So, okay, fertilizing. We gave you a list of the minerals that plants are made out of. Some plants are either made out of 17 or perhaps 18 minerals, but the main ones we don't think about because they're either coming out of air or water. So you got carbon, you have hydrogen, you have oxygen, with those 3. So oxygen is from water, and then hydrogen is from water, and then the carbon is from carbon dioxide in the air. So photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, which is CO2, combined with water, H2O, is turned into sugar. So plants make sugar out of carbon dioxide and water. Sugar molecules are C6H12O6. And there's too much oxygen in the system when you have CO2, so the oxygen is in the form of O2 is released into the atmosphere through the holes in the leaves of the plant. And that's how we get our oxygen. And then the plant has this sugar in it, and cellulose, which is what makes the heart of the tree, the wood of the tree, the bark of the tree. The cellulose is a sugar molecule that's been rearranged. So when you see a tree, it's just pure sugar, essentially pure sugar. But cellulose, we can't eat it. The only thing that can convert cellulose back into sugar is a bacteria. Now, if they harness that bacteria, then we'll have our food supply will suddenly become endless because you can take a piece of wood and eat it. But the only thing that can change back wood into sugar is bacteria, either found in the gut of termites or in the gut of beavers or a lot of herbivores that eat plants. They have this bacteria that can change cellulose into sugar. It's funny, you just want, side note, you don't want to be a beaver. Beavers have to eat the wood, go through the gut, and then they have to re-eat it because when they poop it, it's now sugar. So they have to re-eat their poop. So you may not want to be a beaver in your next life. Anyway, so carbon, hydrogen, oxygen are in water and air. And then the next most important thing is nitrogen. Let's just put them all down. Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. K is potassium. Phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, sulfur. Oops, S is sulfur. Iron is Fe. Chlorine, manganese, boron, zinc, copper, molybdenum, nickel, and cobalt. So a lot of these fertilizer boxes, they only have 3 numbers on them because the macronutrients that you need to apply are nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. They put on the boxes nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in a different ratio, but in a plant, you need more potassium than you need phosphorus. In fact, you need more calcium than you need phosphorus. So phosphorus should actually be down a little further. But you can see on this chart, plants are 45% carbon, 45% oxygen. Oops. 6% hydrogen, probably because hydrogen's a much smaller molecule. Nitrogen is 1.5%, potassium is 1%, phosphorus is 0.2%, calcium is 0.5%. So these are like the macronutrients that we need to apply. And then everything else gets to micronutrients, 0.2, 0.1, 0.01. So iron is a really micronutrient. So we never have to apply iron to plants because there's plenty in the ground. Back in the 90s, iron poor blood was the main thing they advertised on TV, and so was iron poor plants. It was crazy. I mean, plants are turning yellow because of root rot. And they're telling us, no, it's if your plant's turning yellow, it's because of lack of iron. Well, plants can't go from green to yellow. They can't lose iron. So if a plant grows leaves that are real pale, that's iron. But if the leaves are green and turn yellow, that's not iron. They can't lose it out of their leaves. So we had so much false, you don't see that much anymore. No one advertises iron for plants anymore. Because if your soil has any brownness to it at all, it's got the irons in there. Chlorine, 0.01. Manganese, 0.005. 0.002, 0.002. 0.0006, 0.0001, and these are less than that. So what these do in the plant, so carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, the cellulose. So the body of the plant, the cell walls are cellulose. Nitrogen is a membrane. So all cells have membranes. It's not the major part of a plant, but it's still, anything you touch on a person is nitrogen. It's all membranes. Hair is mostly nitrogen. Your skin is mostly nitrogen. So it's the membranes. Potassium is the equivalent to the blood of humans. So blood of humans, our main salt in our blood is potassium. It doesn't have a specific role, although if humans get too little, we get cramps. It's got something to do with the electrical system, but in plants, there's no electrical system. It's just there to balance the other salts. So it's the main sap of the plant. It's the main salt in the juice of fruit. So if you're low in potassium, the fruit won't get as juicy or as nice. Phosphorus is a energy transfer molecule in all animals and plants. It's if you took biochemistry, ATP, ADP, adenosine triphosphate, diphosphate, those are molecules that have phosphorus attached to them. That's how they take energy from breaking down sugar and apply it to what they're applying it to. So it's like when we break down glucose and move a muscle, you need the phosphorus molecule there to do that transfer. Yes.
So is that more for roots then? No.
No. I don't know how that got started. I mean, roots aren't made out of phosphorus.
But isn't that where it takes in the nutrition?
Well, I mean, all parts of the plant that are growing, that are functioning, need the ATP molecules to do that energy, so they need phosphorus for everything, but it's not specifically for roots. We don't know how that got started. It doesn't make any sense. It's just an energy transfer molecule, so it's not an energy storage molecule. That's carbohydrates or starch. It's just a transfer molecule. So who knows? I mean, a lot of people say, well, you need a plant to grow lots of nitrogen, which they do. Leaves are all nitrogen. But if you want it to flower and fruit instead, take away the nitrogen, add phosphorus. Well, taking away the nitrogen is the main thing that helps them flower and fruit. It's not the fact that you gave them the phosphorus, it's just not giving them the nitrogen. Because nitrogen, you're growing a lot of leaves, and growing leaves takes a lot of energy away from anything else. So just the fact that you didn't give them nitrogen, I mean, they substitute phosphorus and potassium, but that wasn't what's causing the flower and fruit. So anyway, energy transfer. Calcium is involved in wood. So a tree's got a lot of calcium in its wood. It's also vital to finish off fruits. I'm not sure exactly what part of the fruit the calcium does, but if your tomatoes or your apples don't have enough calcium, you get these hard brown spots. So you get, it's called blossom end rot on tomatoes, but it's not really a rot. It's this unfinished tissue on the fruit turns hard and brown. On apples, you get these hard brown spots in the flesh. That's not enough calcium in the fruit. Most of these other minerals are involved either in the chlorophyll molecule. That's why if you're lacking iron, you don't get green. If you're lacking magnesium, you're not as green as you should be. If you're lacking zinc, you're not very green. They're all involved in that green chlorophyll molecule. So a lot of those minerals, you miss them, your plant's not as green as it should be because they can't make the chlorophyll molecule properly. And then a lot of these other minerals are involved in other enzyme activity of the plant. So they're needed in very small amounts because these enzymes, there's not that much enzyme in the cells and things. And they have, the guys at the Soil and Plant Lab have, well, actually, we saw some research, UC Davis research, saying that they've seen orchards that are ghostly pale. And they wanted to check out and see how much they produced. Because, they couldn't grow because the leaves were just really pale. They didn't have enough nutrients in them. But when they measured, when they grew the crop, they said the crop wasn't affected. So even though they were really ugly trees, they made a normal crop. I think this was a citrus crop that they were measuring. So the plants don't have to look good to be healthy. And just be aware, fertilizer is not an energy source for the plants. Like we eat essentially glucose products to gain energy. Plants, this stuff is not energy. It's not energy. It's a building material. So if you have a plant that's weak, physically weak, which really means no good sugar storage in it, and you fertilize a lot, you can run that plant to death. It's trying to grow without any energy, and it can't do it. Now there's different kinds of fertilizers. So the original thing my father used in the trade, I remember when I was a kid, because he had these huge sacks, 100 pounds of blood meal, 100 pounds of bone meal, 100 pounds of cottonseed meal. And that's all we used. So in the old days, it was all organic stuff. It was blood meal is from slaughtered cows, and the bone meal is from slaughtered cows, and then cottonseed meal. Now, seed meals are really interesting because essentially the seed has everything the plant needs to grow. That's what the seeds are for. It's got a storage of all the minerals the plants need to grow. So even though the seed meal only says 621, all 17 minerals are in here. So the organic fertilizers in general, most, especially the seed meals, have all 17 minerals. This neem seed meal, cottonseed meal, there's soybean meal, there's quite a few seed meals out there. But a lot of the other ones have manures in them, which generally have all the minerals too. When if you have the feces of what some animal ate, it has to have all. Animals need 16 minerals, not 17. The one mineral that I didn't list that may be essential too is silicon, which is soil. It's interesting because in hydroponics, they don't use soil. And they found out if they spray silicon in the plants, they're a lot sturdier because they're not growing them in dirt. The dirt is pure silicon. So you shouldn't have to apply silicon because that's what soil is. But that's a real interesting thing. So silicon may be an essential mineral that plants need too, but ground is silicon. So, yes.
So I actually had it wasn't a fertilizer, it wasn't marketed like that, but it was a silicone liquid thing that they say you're supposed to put on with every watering. Is that just silly because it's already in dirt and you're just putting dirt in liquid form?
Well, if you're growing hydroponically, then it would make sense.
But not in the ground.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
Marketing. Thank you.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of things that are pretty silly. I mean, there's a product called azomite that people always ask for, and the numbers on it are 0.0 something, 0.0 something. It's a very nutritious rock, but rocks just don't have as much nutrition as a dead. Nature, this is fertilizer or nutrition for the plants, dead leaves. So 90% of all plants depend on a pile of dead leaves being on the ground to get their nutrition from. So the way nature works, for about 90% of all plants, you got what is called the duff layer, dead leaves on top of the ground. And it could include some animal manure, dead stems, other things that died there. So you got your tree or any plant, roots in the ground. There's a fungus in nature that apparently became a symbiotic partner with plants when plants emerged from the oceans and got on land for the first time. How many billion years ago? I don't exactly know or recall what they said. So the algae trying to live on land couldn't get any minerals from the rocks, but this fungus can. So the plants partnered up with this fungus. This fungus actually goes into the dead leaves on top of the ground and breaks them down and gives the minerals to the plant. The fungus can also get minerals out of the dirt if they're there, but it gets the minerals out of these dead leaves and returns them to the same plant, really. That's how nature's supposed to work. In exchange, fungus is made out of cellulose, and it gets it from the tree or the plant that it's attached to. So the plant gives it sugars, and it gives the plant minerals. And 90% of plants are done that way. Now, there are plants that don't need the mycorrhizal fungus, but they're highly evolved to be able to mine this soil. So if you just have bare ground uncovered by construction and it rains, you know that weeds are going to grow. There's certain weeds that have roots that are so advanced they can mine the soil for the nutrients that they need. And around here you'll see mustard growing on the hills. You'll see certain foxtail grasses. Those are the ones that can extract the minerals out of the native soils. But once they do that, the other plants come in with their mycorrhizal fungus and they steal all the nutrients. So in a climax ecosystem like a forest, you don't see any more of those weeds on the ground. There's no more minerals left that they can pick out of the dirt. They're all now in the duff layer and in the plants. So the scientists have gone into rainforests and commented, there's no nutrition in the ground. Of course not. It's in the dead leaves and in the trees. They're always making these weird comments like they just don't know what's going on. There's no nutrition in the soil in a climax ecosystem. Of course, if it burns down, then it's suddenly all released again. Then all the weeds come back, and then the mycorrhizal fungus comes back in and takes over again. So they say in your garden, the mycorrhizal fungus is the kingpin. It can be the same fungus plant attached to every single plant in your garden, except for the plants that don't use mycorrhiza, which are cabbage family. So cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, radishes, turnips do not use mycorrhizal fungus. Grasses can use mycorrhizal, or they can get by on their own, a lot of the grasses. So there's a few plants that don't use mycorrhizal fungus, but the majority of plants that we grow use that system. And the University of California, Davis said that it doesn't matter what the soil's like. When they did a survey of the Central Valley, they were looking at the native plants there, and they said the native plants grew no matter what the soil had in it. Alkaline, acidic, rocky, clay, high in boron, low in nitrogen, high in whatever. They said the same plants grew because they're just mining the leaves. If there was a pile of leaves there, the same plants grew all over. The pH of soil didn't matter to them. They were just recycling nutrients out of the dead leaves. So that's the goal of all new farmers. Don't throw away your dead plants, because up until recently, farm crop was over, they'd have these huge dumpsters brought in, 40 cubic yard dumpsters, and they put their entire crop in there and sent it to the landfill. And that was all their fertilizer going to the landfill. So now the new generation farmer is being told, figure out how to recycle all your plants onto your land. It's not easy when you have a big farm. On small farms, not a problem. You just do it by hand. But on a big farm, when they're using big tractors, how do you do that without, in fact, wind blows a lot of this stuff out of there too. So they have to figure out how to get it in, staying on the property without burying it. Let's put it that way, without burying it, keeping it on your property. Now, farms do bury compost. but they know that they can't put too much on it. So we've read they bury compost because if they don't, it just blows away. But the max they're allowed that they know they can do is 5 cubic yards of compost buried per acre. And if you know a pile of 5 cubic yard pile is about this size, and if you spread that over an acre, it's like that thick. I mean, you can see that the soil is not white, but it's not much measure. It's not well, like they said, when farms do that, their soil, instead of being 0.9% organic, it's 1.1% organic by volume. So it's not enough to mess up the crops too badly. And they said it does help. The fact that they've got that little tiny bit of organic matter in the soil, it helps with the nutrition. But if they can figure out how to layer it on top, because some of the smaller farms, they're going a foot deep. In nature, this is 5 inches. It said the average around the world is 5 inches deep of dead leaves. On some farms, they're going 12 inches on row crops and 18 inches on orchard trees. And a friend of mine did go down to Guatemala. He wanted to see how deep it was underneath avocado trees. And I still can't believe what he told me. He says they dug through 5 foot of dead leaves on the ground. Now, the research has shown that the nutrients in a dead leaf that falls on the ground can get back into the same tree in as little as 90 days. So we've got both organic sources of fertilizer, which are mixtures of dead things, essentially dead stuff in here. And then we have the chemical fertilizers, which are these here. And a famous one, Miracle Grow was real famous for a long time. So the disadvantage, now to a plant, the minerals in here are just as good as the minerals in here. However, the soil organisms that keep the soil alive would rather use these. So in the long haul, the ecosystem in the ground is better off with organics. In the short run, it's not that big a deal. But the problem with some of these, like these have all the minerals, all 17 minerals in them. This one's actually pretty good. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 minerals in there. Some of the products only have 5. And if you only put 5 in there, you're missing a lot of things. And eventually your plants become chlorotic looking. So when plants become chlorotic from lack of fertilizer, like iron, what'll happen is the whole leaf is real pale and the veins are a little greener. But if you're missing potassium, which is real common in Orange County, you get a pattern that looks like a Christmas tree on a yellow background. That's really common in Orange County on citrus, because we just don't have enough potassium in the ground. So in Orange County, most soils in Orange County have a lot of phosphorus, the middle number, a lot of phosphorus in the ground. They said 2 to 3 times as much as the plant actually needs. So if you're gardening in the ground, you don't have to add phosphorus. We're already well situated that way. Primarily the first number, a little bit of the second number. Now, the other things you have to know about fertilizers is that nitrogen is too mobile. It's really the only mineral that's really mobile. So the soil never has enough nitrogen, because nitrogen is either leaching downwards as nitrates in the water, or it's evaporating the air as ammonia. So you're losing your nitrogen 2 directions. Whereas phosphorus it sticks to the dirt, just doesn't move. And potassium also sticks to soil pretty well, although they claim if you put potassium on the ground, it only goes through the soil. It goes through the soil about half an inch a year with the movement of the water. So you'd have to apply it maybe once every 20 to 30 years to keep your plants with enough potassium, because eventually it gets flushed through the root zone, but it takes 2 decades to do that. A friend of mine ran the banana orchard up near La Conchita, and they said, yeah, they'd apply potassium every 20 years to their bananas. So palms show a lot of potassium deficiency as spots on the old leaves. So it looks like, this time of year it's real common. The oldest leaves on palm trees, lots of spots, orange spots, brown spots on the lower leaves, because palms can only get fertilizer out of the soil. The roots are only active between May and October. The ground has to be 70 degrees for palms to get nutrition out. So all winter long, they're starving. The roots aren't active in the winter time. So in this time of year, they're growing their new leaves because it's warm. The tree is warm, but the ground's not warm enough yet. So they're taking the nutrition out of the old leaves to the new leaves, and the old leaves get all these spots on them because they've taken out the nutrition. So they're getting dead spots in those old leaves. But the fertilizer doesn't help unless it's May. May through October, the palms can get the fertilizer out of the ground. Most other plants can operate at cooler temperatures than palms can, but a lot of the tropical plants can't. We notice that hibiscus, especially in containers where the soil gets colder, all aster leaves turn yellow in the spring, and then they make new leaves. In the ground, they stay warmer. The ground's warmer than pots are in the wintertime, so the hibiscus in ground tend to stay greener. Okay, so there's one footnote in that you can make plants stronger by spraying them with sugar. This is so weird, though. So back in the 1980s, we're reading this article. It appeared in the California Rare Fruit Growers Journal, saying that in Palos Verdes, it's so cloudy in Palos Verdes that they can't get their citrus trees to flower and fruit because they can't get enough energy. So someone in Palos Verdes saw this article where back east they're trying to start these hardwood cuttings of trees, and they noticed that they would just start growing and then they would stop and fail. And they tested the cuttings, and they said the carbohydrate level in these cuttings had dropped too low to finish the root system. So they invented a formula that the emerging foliage would absorb that would put more carbohydrates, sugar, inside that little cutting. So the formula was seaweed, fish, and molasses. So molasses being the sugar form, and this being a source of nitrogen and phosphorus, potassium. Seaweed is a growth hormone. So seaweed plants are the fast-growing plants, 3 foot a day of growth. They're loaded with hormones that make plants grow. So they put that in the formula too. And they sprayed on the cuttings, and the cuttings worked. So the guys, some homeowner in Palos Verdes researched that, and he made the same formula and sprayed his tree, and he said, it flowers and fruits now. So we saw that and go, okay, does that really work? So I had a plum tree at my house. Well, first I put it on a citrus tree because I had a citrus tree that 5 years in the ground, growing, no flowers, no fruit. So I sprayed that 6 times with this solution, and the solution is in 1 gallon of water, 1 ounce molasses, 1 ounce fish, 1 ounce of seaweed. Mix it all together and spray it on. So I sprayed that solution on that citrus tree that never bore fruit, and the next year had 200 oranges. But I'm going, okay, was that just a coincidence? Was it just now old enough, or was it actually making a difference? So I had this plum tree, a good-sized plum tree, that was averaging, we looked at it, it's averaging about 5 plums per branch. We go, okay, let's just spray one branch in the fall. Plants grow in the spring. If you spray them with sugar, then it grows faster. Summertime, they're growing. So if you spray in the summertime, they grow faster. In the fall, they stop growing and store energy for next year's crop. So you spray them in the fall if you want them to make more fruit. So we sprayed the tree 6 times every other week in the fall on one branch. Next year, that branch had over 20 plums on it. We're going, it seems to work. We're going, okay, it seems to work. You get more energy in that branch and they fruit better.
Why in a season, like, did you do different? So you said you did that in the fall.
Right.
So it wouldn't matter if it's in the spring, like for certain fruits that grow in the spring.
Well, yeah, certain plants get energy in the spring too to make fruit. We know pomegranates, persimmons, and jujubes gather energy from sunlight in the spring, but a lot of plants, the flower buds were already created in winter from fall's energy storage, and if they don't have it, then they won't even make the flower buds. Now, citrus put flower buds on new growth, and so does persimmons, so do pomegranates. They comes on the new growth. So in that case, the sugar on the new growth would also help the flowers, but it's better to do it in the fall to get that plant all energized before they start making new growth on them. And then we learned that the people who grow those 2,000-pound pumpkins, they said without this, they can't break 500 pounds. So they're cheating, but you can't tell they're cheating. It's like when those bicycle guys in Europe were injecting themselves with more blood. Yeah, they're putting more oxygen, blood-carrying things into their body, and no one could tell until they started checking how many blood cells they had in their body. So, but anyway, yeah. So you can get. So it's interesting, if you spray this on your plants every week or so, the leaves come out huge. So everything gets bigger and grows faster, and you get more fruit. And I started meeting people like a guy from the Philippines. He tells me, we always spray cane sugar on the mango trees to make the fruit sweeter. Makes sense. You spray the leaves with sugar, and they'll transfer the sugar to the fruit. And it's interesting. We saw articles saying that because they're checking on how sugar gets into plants, because a lot of fertilizers get into the little pore openings, but they said the sugar goes right through the wax layer of the leaf. They didn't think that would work, but it goes right through the wax layer of the leaf. So you can spray the upper side of the leaf and it goes right in. Whereas foliar feeding fertilizers seems to be more through the stomata, although it may be going through the wax layer too when you foliar feed plants. So if you want to make a plant stronger, this is the only way that makes sense. Or you put lights on it at night. That's what other pumpkin growers do too. Competitors, they have lights on their pumpkins at night also. More energy to the plant.
Could reflectors work also?
Pardon?
Against sunlight reflectors.
Well, you might get too much. Well, they say that if you put red mulch on the ground, ground, so it reflects the red rays of the sun back onto the plant, that works. And of course, in indoor farming, they use the blue lights and the red lights.
I ways that good.
Mhm. Okay, so that's nutrition. Just so you know, we couldn't get this for all, but Neptune's Harvest has both seaweed and fish in the same solution. So you don't have to buy all three. But do know that seaweed goes, the hormone value of it goes bad quicker than molasses or fish. So I still buy it, use it separately so I can use this up faster. And if you ever put fish emulsion in your car, make sure it's in a cup holder or somehow stays upright. Because we had one lady who the bottle fell over in her trunk and it spilled out. Yes.
So a nectarine tree, which is now leafing out and starting to flower, when do you start applying this solution?
Well, it's better if you did in the fall.
Well, I can't now, so.
Right. Well, you can do it any time. It makes the plant stronger. Anytime you apply it, it makes the plant stronger.
So in the fall, then, of course, before any of the leaves actually start falling off the plant.
Yeah.
So the latest would be, what, October, you'd say?
Well, if it's a healthy nectarine, it should hang on to its leaves till early December.
Okay.
But they stop growing in the, when fall hits. Once the days get shorter than the nights, that's when they're programmed to stop growing and store energy.
All right.
So at the end of September, you can start.
Okay.
And you can do it every week if you want. You can do it every day if you want.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing I should mention. So we got reports from the ag department saying that the ratio between nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium on the average crop grown in the United States is 6:4. See, 6:12 is really close. We actually have a box up there down to a fruit tree at 6:24. And a lot of the fertilizers aren't even close to those numbers, but that's what they said the average numbers. Now, again, in the ground, we don't need this number at all. Phosphorus, we're already overloaded with it. In fact, potassium, if you keep doing a 6:24 over the years, this starts building up too. So after a few years, your main thing is the nitrogen, because that's the main thing we're losing, especially if you leave your dead leaves on the ground. You still might lose them. Well, you're not going to lose anything if you leave your dead leaves on your ground. But if you throw stuff away, this is the ratio of the fertilizer that you should be applying. In hydroponics, they can fool with the numbers a lot because, in the soil, you can't do much. If you have a lot of phosphorus or a lot of potassium, you can't suddenly change it. Hydroponics, they can change it just like, they just drain it out and put in different formula. So they can really, like when they want to grow marijuana, they have a high nitrogen to get that plant growing. And then when they want it to bloom, they just take out the nitrogen. So it's high this and high that, but no more nitrogen. So it can't grow at all, but it flowers and it makes its thing. So they can manipulate hydroponics. You can't manipulate the ground that way. And palm trees, so they did a lot. The University of Florida did palm research, and palms would be this ratio. So palms are different than a lot of plants. They need a lot of nitrogen and a lot of potassium, low phosphorus. So 3:1:3 ratio. So this palm food is 15:5:15. That's a 3:1:3 ratio. I guess palm trunks must have a lot of potassium in them. I wonder if cactus do too. I would think cactus would have to have a lot of potassium with all that juice.
Would that apply to bananas as well?
I haven't seen research on bananas. We know they contain a lot of potassium in the fruit, but so does all fruits have a lot of potassium. So I don't know. I haven't seen. The United States doesn't do research on banana growing, so I'll have to see if anyone else has done it. Okay, so mulch-wise, you need to cover the ground with something. If you don't have enough dead leaves, we have ground up bark, different kinds. Fir bark is like nuggets. Cedar and redwood are like gorilla hair. They're strippy and red. They don't provide much nutrition, but they do the insulation part. So the reasons we would apply mulches is one is insulation. The soil, plants do not like soil temperatures above 90 degrees. 90 is like, they're most active, healthiest, most active in the 80s, 85 to 90. But you get much above 90, they start burning up. So they're much more sensitive to heat than the top of the plant. 115 degrees, about 115 is about the limit for the leaf of a plant, because leaves get pretty hot even on a cool day. They get pretty warm to the touch, but the roots can't go much above 90. So they found out if you have 3 inches of mulch on the ground, the soil in an orchard in Texas on a 90-degree day was less than 90 degrees. But if it wasn't covered with mulch, it was 120 a foot deep, which is just burning up the roots. So that really helps. If you have a rose garden, you don't have any mulch on it, summertime, all the roses look cooked. Their roots are all just dying in that heat. Whereas if the ground's covered either with plants or with mulch, the roses look great, like they do in the spring. So the soil temperature caused a lot of trouble on certain plants. Not all plants. Plumerias care less. They love hot dirt. Citrus love hot dirt, but a lot of plants do not like the soil to heat up. Yes.
I have a couple of containers, flat containers for different fruits and vegetables. I'm concerned about when it gets real hot and the sun's baking right on the pot itself.
Oh yeah, it damages them.
So if I put, say, some kind of like a foam board in front of it so
Right.
it doesn't hit it,
Right.
that'll help, right?
Right. You can just paint it white. You can put a piece of white paper on it. Anything that reflect the sun off of there. In nurseries that grow in black plastic, what they do is they double pot the plants. So they'll have a bigger pot with a smaller pot sitting inside of it, so the outer pot takes all the heat and doesn't transfer because there's an air gap there. So a lot of nurseries do that. Wholesale nurseries do that. So insulation, and plus we don't want to freeze. Of course, we don't freeze here in Southern California, but most areas south of Canada and Alaska, the ground doesn't freeze. Even if the air does, the ground doesn't. So it insulates the roots. 2, stops weeds. So if the ground's covered with an inch or more of something that keeps it dark, most seeds can't sprout. Some seeds still can, but most seeds can't sprout. Yes.
What about using bark for insulation?
It works pretty good. Even rocks work for insulation.
Well, the bark looks nice.
Right. But yeah, gravel and rocks can work just as well as bark, because rocks will radiate the heat off the surface. They won't transfer it below them.
Well, I was just thinking of my roses at home have the bark around.
Yeah.
Just for being pretty.
But yeah, it also insulates.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it's deep enough, it stops the weeds. We saw this research in Florida where they're putting mulch in the orchard, and they only put it 1/2 inch deep. So the orchard guy said, well, this mulch is no good. We're getting too many weeds growing. It's like, so I emailed the researchers. I said, well, they should have put down 3 inches of mulch and they wouldn't have got all those weeds. Then it would do its job better. They said, well, that wasn't the goal of the research. They just wanted to see if the extra nutrition helped. Well, it helped grow weeds. So someone didn't run that research very well. With just a 1/2 inch of mulch, you didn't get the results you wanted. So it stops weeds if it's deep enough. 3 inches is better. And again, you can go 12 inches deep. Now, a lot of nurseries or garden centers or academia that don't know, they keep telling you don't pile the mulch up against the plants because you'll rot it. Well, that's because the plants are growing in compost in the first place. You put compost on top of the compost, yeah, it's just going to rot the plants out. If the plants were growing properly, the mulch on the trunks wouldn't hurt them. The only plant we tell you not to put mulch around the trunk is citrus. If citrus, that graft area stays damp, sometimes you get that gummosis rot going on. So we unbury the trunks of citrus, but I don't know of any other plant that gets that damaged by having mulch on it. And again, that one orchard said they do 18 inches on an apple orchard, 18 inches deep.
I have a bunch of, what's it, it's like a cedar pine needles. I can use that for mulching.
Oh, yes.
I'm concerned about cats going poop in there. And can I put that in like a vegetable or that transferred?
The poop?
The fruit?
The poop?
No, yeah, because if you put it on if it's in there in the mulch, it's gonna leak down.
Well, you'd be concerned if you're growing root crops.
Oh, okay,
If it's tomatoes, it doesn't transfer.
okay.
But you always have to worry about contact. That's why, they had problems with pigs running through fields, causing salmonella on leaf crops. So that's one thing you have to worry about. But in nature, it happens.
Okay,
So
so strawberries would be okay. That's not good.
yeah, it's because if strawberries on the dirt. Now, if you put your strawberries in little paper cups on the soil so they weren't in contact with the dirt, then I feel a little better.
They're in pots.
Okay, well then there's no problem. A lot of times if you grow strawberries in pots, the fruit hangs over the edge and it's not in contact with the soil, so that wouldn't be a problem there.
Oh, okay.
And then 3, it absorbs water faster than the ground does. So it just helps hold the water. So the ground only absorbs 1/4 inch of water per hour max, but the mulch will hold in place so it has longer time to sit there. But what's interesting is that it can also create water. Now, in a dry area like Riverside, no. But if you're near the coast, they did this, so the farm up in, what's that peninsula up in Washington on the coast? Anyway, they have a farm, apple orchard on the peninsula, and they said, we had to water our apple orchard back in the 70s every day in the summer, yet the forest next to us never gets any water, and it's real lush looking. So what they did is they walked into the forest one morning and they said all this leaf matter on the ground is just soggy wet. It's condensing the water out of the atmosphere at night. So cold things condense water. So they called up a bunch of tree trimmers, had them dump all the tree trimmings in their orchard, and they made it 18 inches deep. And they said they've never had to water their apple orchard since. The water just condenses out of the air. So if you have humidity in the air, you'll get, and we get good humidity most of the year here, except when we have Santa conditions. Because in Texas, they said it was real interesting. I saw this report where they were puzzled. The Texas crews during the 1980s drought in Texas, they're losing all the plants by the roads. They're just turning brown. So they had this crew going, and they were just chopping up the dead bushes on the side of the road, and they piled them all on one side of the road. They said, "This is odd. That side of the highway is greening up." So the moisture was condensed. You know, Texas is pretty humid. So this condensing into the dead stuff on the side of the road, and it was creating water that was growing plants on that side of the road. So it can create water. Again, not when the air is dry, but at night we have lots of humidity near the coast especially. So I don't know how much, but it'll help. Okay, we do carry garden straw, which is probably a better mulch than bark, nutrition-wise especially. And I've been told by our customers who use the straw that it lasts about a year, whereas some of the barks can last 5 years. So, okay. So then we have this thing called crop rotation, which is the same thing as replant syndrome. So we have so much weird ideas why crop rotation is important. So we have a lot of people telling you that plants don't grow good in the same ground twice because they use up the minerals. We know what all the minerals are. You can just reapply it every year and get the same results. The problem is they leave behind dead bodies. It doesn't take much. So anytime you grow a plant, and even the plant didn't die, you just pull it out, a lot of those little roots break off in the ground, so now you have dead pieces of root in the ground. And plants are just as sensitive as people are, or animals are. So, you know, if the best analogy is if someone got murdered and they chopped up the body into a million pieces and they scattered them throughout your home may only be like 1% human body, but that's enough to keep you out of that house. You can't live in a house with 1% human body laying all around that's now decomposing. And anything that dies, the diseases and bacteria that are there to decompose it are already in the pieces of dead tissue. So the forest department did the research. They said, you kill a tree, it starts rotting immediately because all the organisms that rot that tree were present in the wood when it was alive, but once you kill it, they all go to work and start decomposing the tree. Diseases are all present in our human flesh. As soon as we die, it starts rotting our flesh. So any crop you grow leaves behind dead bodies that will affect that crop. So if you kill a frog in your house, it's not going to be that devastating. If you kill a fish in your house, you know, it's just not that bad. You kill a monk in your house, you got problems. You got to get rid of the pieces of that body, and plants are just the same way. So in plants, in orchards, they call it the replant syndrome. So they did a study in the apple orchard where a tree got knocked over by a tractor, pulled it out, put a new tree in. It didn't grow at all. It actually shrank. So they started doing the research on it, and they found out that for the apple tree, if they remove an area 3 foot wide by 1.5 foot deep, about a half yard of dirt, and brought in soil from a different orchard that wasn't growing apples, They put the new apple tree in that, it did really well. In fact, it did better than a new apple orchard. You know, a virgin apple orchard, you're putting a new apple trees in the ground with no old trees, apple trees around. This tree in virgin soil in an old orchard did better. And they call that the replant syndrome, and it works for any tree crop. If you remove the tree, you've got to replace the dirt if you want to put the same tree back. If you put something unrelated in there, it doesn't care. So on vegetables and flowers too, if you pull out tomatoes, now I did this just to see how it affected tomatoes. So I had a tomato plant first year, it did real well, say 100% crop. Put the same tomato plant in the ground the second year, it did maybe 60% of the first year. And then the third year, when you put the same plant in the same soil, it just turned yellow right away and didn't do anything. So crop rotation on plants. A friend of mine who runs Orange County Produce, it's a huge farm on 200 acres leased land in Orange County. They have a 10 crop rotation cycle, which means they don't put the same or related crop in the same plot for 10 crops. And we leased land from them for 4 years, and in those 4 years, we did not see them put the same crop in the same plot of land once. So we know it's at least 4 years, if not longer, that it took them to go through 10 crops before they replant. They're an organic farm. So now if you're a chemical farm, you can get around that because what they do is they fumigate the ground. So they cover it in clear plastic, they gas it, and all the bacteria and fungus in the ground are killed off. So even though there's dead bodies of plants in the ground, it's like, taking a human body and cooking it. It neutralizes all the bacteria and fungus that are decomposing the body.
Kills all the good stuff too.
Probably does. Yeah, it does. But they can fumigate the ground and grow the same crop reasonably. It's better to rotate your crops and just not, nature ecosystems just rotate. So a tree falls, the tree can't grow there for 10, 20 years until the root system's totally rots out. In the meantime, you get weeds, flowers, bushes, and then eventually the tree grows back in. Now, there's exceptions to that, and it happens in the temperate climates that have seasons. So they know that if you have a really good wildfire, it sterilizes soil about 8 to 10 inches deep. It's like fumigating the ground. And the same trees can grow right back. So in the tropics, it doesn't happen. They said in the tropics, they don't burn. So they said the distance between similar trees averages 70 yards. Because once this tree dies, and the roots go out a long ways, none of its relatives can live in that area for decades. So that, like they say in Mexican jungles, 250 species of trees. Whereas in the United States, you can have a monoculture forest, all fir or all oak or all birch. It's just, there's not many. It's not that diversified because of the forest fires can totally sterilize everything. I saw this interesting research article in Arizona where they're saying, okay, our college group wants to find what plant grows best in this desert environment. And he said, we couldn't find a single plant that does best. There's always at least two in the ecosystem. In this one valley, said it was either mesquite or it was cholla cactus. They thought, one plant should just dominate, but it doesn't, because when it dies, the other plant has to grow. It can't grow in the same soil twice. So they had two plants in this ecosystem. You can't just have one. unless you also burned the area down. But that was, and they never came up with that conclusion that, yeah, you can't have just one plant because it can't grow in the same soil twice. So we've learned from our growers. So the bare root roses are grown on farms. It's a 2-year crop. They grow one rose crop every 5 years. For the 3 years between crops, they grow other farm crops. And then Dave Wilson, who does the fruit trees in the ground for 2 years, they're on a 4-year rotation cycle. So for 2 years, they don't grow fruit trees there either, or they grow different fruit trees, unrelated fruit trees on that land. So they said it's a 4-year rotation cycle. So they know what they're doing. They don't like to leave the ground on certain plants, like they said, grapes. They'd rather grow the grapes in the same plot of ground year after year after year, because if they only grow 1 year, you get this grape plant that's like 50 foot across. And they can't ship that grape plant, it's just too big. So after that first year, they replant the grapes in the same soil, and they don't grow as fast. So we'd get grape plants that are only like 6 foot long. Instead of 50 foot long, we get grape plants that are 6 foot long, because they had grown them in the same soil over and over and over. They just don't want that vigorous a plant. It's interesting what they learn to do to avoid those problems. Yes.
Don't some crops that farmers burn it off? And is that to replace something in the soil that they do that, or is that just because they?
Well, it's burning the crop is one good way to get rid of the waste. And it also sterilizes the waste. So what there was an interesting article, UC Davis, I believe, or was another university, might have been Chico. So in California, when they grow rice near Sacramento, they'd burn the chaff, the dead rice plants after the harvest. And then, the EPA in California finally said, you can't burn in California anymore. So they would just leave the dead plants there on the ground. And then they found they couldn't grow the rice plants there the next year. Everything was rotting.
But they could if they burned.
Yeah, if they burned it, it was good enough that they can grow the rice plants again. But if they didn't burn it, they couldn't grow them there again. They have to grow a different crop. So it forced them to rotate their crops, because burning was cleaning up the farm. So our politics gets in the way of a lot of.
There would be some kind of exception, but.
Well, another interesting thing I saw was that in Yosemite, the entranceway, they don't let Yosemite burn. So they said they have a lot of fir trees at the entrance that are dying and falling over now, because they're not allowing the Yosemite to burn and get rid of all the dead trees. And they can't grow the fir trees back again because they won't grow there anymore. So they're having a dilemma there, because they need to burn that place down to get the trees renewed. Otherwise, they have all these dead trees falling over. So that's interesting too.
So I have 2 raised beds. I don't have 4 where I can rotate every 4 years. What's the solution?
There is none.
But what about you putting different type of crops in that?
Well, yeah, if you plant different crops. So on this sheet, we put the families of the crops that are all related. So the Solanaceae family is eggplant, pepper, potato, tomato, tomatillo. They're all closely related. You can't put them in the same bed twice. And then we have the Cucurbiceae family, cucumbers, gourds, melons, pumpkin, squash. So those are the different families that you rotate your plants between. So farmers just follow this, they have to follow that rule. So on each bed, if you have, say, 4 beds, it's preferable to put all the same family members into one bed. So all your tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, peppers, potatoes in one bed, and then the next year move them to the next bed, next year move to the next bed, next year, and then back to the first bed. Now there's a different way of growing vegetables called square foot gardening. And the advantage of square foot gardening, they put a different plant in each square, but all these beds are connected. The advantage to that is that when you have a tomato next to lettuce, next to corn, next to squash, the pests and diseases don't move through there too well because every plant's different. The disadvantage is that if you use rolled dirt in here, you pull these plants out, you break off all the roots, and all the roots are in every place. You can't, after a few years of that, the whole thing fails. So what square foot gardening practitioners determined is that they have to make the soil really light. So instead of using rolled dirt, they put perlite and vermiculite and compost and peat in here. So when they pull the plants out, the roots don't break off. They come out with the plant. That's the only way. So they had to make it totally artificial soil to make this work because rolled dirt would break off all the roots as you pull the plants out. And then the roots would be rotting, and all throughout here, there'd be just a mass of all these different rotting roots in this 4 foot wide area, and you couldn't grow anything. But when they changed the soil mix to something really light, not as much root would break off, so they can do it. So you spend all your money on the soil. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.